and welcome to the SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So in this episode, I'll be discussing the 2022 crime mystery follow-up Death on the Nile, as based on the 1937 novel of the same name by Agatha Christie and as directed by Kenneth Branagh. The movie follows the further crime-solving exploits of one Hercule Poirot, as played once again by Kenneth Branagh, who we last saw in the last movie in the series, 2017's The Murder on the Orient Express, which he also directed. Set in 1937, 3 years following the events of the previous movie, we now catch up with Poirot on vacation in Egypt when he runs into his old friend Book, as played once again by Tom Bateman, who, following being dismissed by his father from his job managing the Orient Express, is now travelling with his mother, Euphemia, as played by Annette in order to attend the wedding party of one Lynette Ridgway, as played by Gal Gadot, and Simon Doyle, as played by Armie Hammer, who are newlyweds honeymooning in Egypt with a number of their family and friends. Poirot joins the party of guests as they take the stunning sights and monuments of this enchanting land, and take off on board the SS Karnak, for a cruise down the River Nile to the temples of Abu Simbel. I am really going to struggle with quite a lot of these pronunciations going forwards. However, and I'm all tongue-twisted already, however, the frivolities are soon interrupted when a murder occurs on board, and it becomes up to Poirot, as it always does, as the world's greatest detective, of course, to take on the case and find who could have conducted such an atrocious deed, where the evidence may be limited and indeed everybody has motive, means and opportunity. With a case that gets ever more entangled with every turn, can Poirot identify the culprit before any more of the passengers meet a similarly grisly fate? One thing this movie does is try and set a backstory for Poirot that ties in with his attitude and rationale as we progress through the story. Evident from the very first scenes, which show a very young Poirot fighting in the trenches during World War I. Events which affect the rest of his life and his outlook on love, which does end up somewhat kind of jaded, to say the least. Now, this setup had some promise, and the few first opening sequences that we had were hot, steamy, intriguing, you know? They had an energy that teased a tantalising love triangle, jealousy, and a case to sink our teeth into. But alas, it seemed to stagnate for some time thereafter. Approximately half of the film was used to build up the characters, which, fair enough, was more than we had in the first movie. However, we'd already kind of grasped the basics well before the murder actually occurred, which for me should have been where the main focus was. That, and of course, the way in which Poirot went about solving it. This just seemed a little lacking in that department, given that we had been treated, during to his last adventure, given what we had got, we had very few clues other than the characters themselves, and so the overall investigation really kind of tantamounted to a bunch of people squabbling and Poirot conducting a few heated investigations. I mean, all the elements were there, don't get me wrong, a juicy mystery to solve, some fantastic characters and an absolutely phenomenal cast. A bunch of likely suspects, cads, rats, scoundrels and dirty cheats. Love, anguish, jealousy. This should have sizzled as hot as the Egyptian deserts, But it just felt lost somehow in the myriad of all that it was trying to convey. Now, I don't necessarily want to knock it too much. It was an adequate crime drama from what it was. The direction was fantastic, the scenes and the location totally exotic and truly mesmerising. We had characters with spirit, and certainly more than a few with oomph, and a lot of presence. I don't think the film's problems kind of lied there. For me, it was more about the execution of the story itself rather than anything else, Poirot felt like a spare spoon, a tag-along, if you like, pretty much for the kind of like the first half of the movie. And then offered us an investigation thereafter that kind of felt rushed and somewhat fleeting, Although Branagh, he was totally in his element once again, that was evident, both in front and behind the camera. I just couldn't help but feel that this version of Poirot was more conceited, depressed even, and resorted to accusing everybody directly in order to solve the case. Branagh's previous iteration was more cunning, more precise and calculating, and this side of Poirot just didn't shine through as much as it did, this time around for me, Cast-wise, certain issues aside, they dazzled, especially Gadot, who was more than the centrepiece of this movie, and made quite the entrance and continued to kind of scintillate whenever she was in focus. It was also quite the treat to see Dawn French and Jennifer Saunders back on the screen together. Quite a rare thing these days, following their common double act of the 80s and the 90s. Now that was cinema gold, all of it on its own. Certainly for fans of the duo, of course, and they had some fantastic on-screen chemistry too, and not nearly as cheesy as I kind of thought it would be, which really kind of showcased their range and indeed their friendship. And here we go with the pronunciation, so I apologise profusely for these. Sophie Okonedo also plays a fantastically strong character too that really kind of stood out for me. Quite spunky, non-apologetic, full of sass. She certainly captures the attention of Poirot, giving him quite the run for his money and throwing him off his guard more than once. It's also a lavish production with a real classic old school feel that to some extent captures the imagination on its own. With some fantastically sweeping cinematography once again, and that kind of bright hue that simply exudes the brilliance of the cast and the exotic location in which it takes place. However, I think the focus was lost. The focus of something such as the Orient Express, for instance. Without that, the film seemed to kind of wander quite a bit in terms of direction. It wasn't really until they boarded the Karnak, I was going to say it again, that it really felt like everything had been set in motion, and that the kind of this majestic focus, which had been so much a big part of the first movie, had returned. It just took far too long to get us there, without anything really substantial in return. But it is an event. It has a captivating quality. Lots of beautiful people in beautiful places with more money than sense. It has some decently heated moments, passionate at times, but just not consistently so. Branagh's longtime musical collaborator Patrick Doyle also returns to bring us a phenomenally epic score, one of the most notable elements of the movie for me. This sounded like an Arabian adventure and certainly captured the visuals and catapulted them onto another level. A score full of Eastern promise and sweeping crescendos, decidedly sharp and indulgently edgy with real classically themed undertones. Overall, for me, and for all its misgivings, I still had fun with this one. I think in the end, the main issues for me were pacing and the lack of any kind of real substantial investigation. For me, I was looking forward to all of the twists and the turns that would come from such an undertaking by the great Poirot. But in the end, it felt rushed and, in this respect, relatively unbalanced. The crime itself is just not as savoured this time around. It is, to be fair, as expected, from what I had already seen in the trailers and from watching the previous movies Branagh had directed in the series, movie that Branagh has kind of directed in the series. A very sleek, elegantly shot and sensual movie. A grand exotic expedition full of temples, temptations, lies, deceit and subterfuge. Full of melodrama and jealousy. But it takes its time to really set sail, and as a result, all of this just feels lacking. Like one long travelogue. I mean, Egypt looks amazing. The way that they've kind of depicted it, even if they weren't there all of the time. But I just don't think the cinematography was used to the same effectiveness as it was for the Orient Express. It all just feels like sightseeing. It's certainly an adequate mystery. I think that's the word. Set within a very luscious and exuberant backdrop, totally indulgent. It's just not the most powerful or emotive when all's said and done. The story wasn't quite as intricate as I had hoped it would be. The rest just feels very spread out. So, that brings me to the end of this episode. Many thanks for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions and other movie-related content. Absolutely loved having you here at SciFirst MovieTalk and definitely love to have you back. Most of all, just thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.